Hello everybody, my name is Julie Fast. When I was 18 years old, I graduated from high school in Hawaii and went to a university in the southern state of Alabama named Auburn University, and had a great time, fell in love with a football player, well, American football player, and had a really nice time there. And then one day I woke up and decided I didn't want to be there anymore, and that I would rather go to university where there was a professional hockey team. So I called my parents and I said, I don't want to go to school here anymore. I want to go to school where there's a professional hockey team. They had no idea why. They said, okay. So I left Alabama and went up to a small university in Washington State because it was next to the Vancouver Canucks professional ice hockey team. I went to class a couple times, didn't sleep, started drinking for the first time ever. And I remember sitting in the quad. You guys don't have a quad here, but a lot of our universities have one main square. And all I did was sit, and I wouldn't go to class, and I'd watch the guys go by. And I'd go into the library, and I would sit, and I'd say, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I remember one night going into the cafeteria and getting a plate of glasses and walking outside and throwing the glasses at the trees. And then one night I went into a bar and met a guy named Brad, fell in love, and left college and moved in with him at age 19. My parents had no idea what was going on. I lost all of my university money, and I went to live with him in Vancouver, Canada, and I told my parents, oh, I'm in love, this is what matters. And of course, when he broke up with me, I had my first downswing. I am obviously the person on the panel with bipolar disorder. Those were all my manias, and I had a downswing. When he broke up with me, I went back to my parents' house, and I remember riding my bicycle next to a bus saying, if I just put this bicycle in front of the bus, everything will be okay. And I was 19. And from age 19 to 31, I lived in a million different places. I went to 4 different colleges. I did manage to get a degree in English literature. It took me 8 years. And finally, at age 31, I was diagnosed with what at the time was called bipolar disorder 2, rapid cycling with psychotic features. Today, I would be diagnosed with what's known as schizoaffective disorder. I have mania, depression, anxiety, ADHD, and psychosis. My first 3 days here were spent with mania, psychosis, depression, anxiety, and ADHD symptoms. Because of the flight from the United States to here, my bipolar went a little bit wild. And I had my plan in place, and I took care of it. But it kept me from traveling like I wanted to do, and kept me from going to the hallucinations class that I missed in experimental psychology on Monday. But I made it here. So what matters for those of us with severe mental health disorders like the kind I have, those of us with bipolar, schizophrenia, unipolar, et cetera, is that we can learn to manage these illnesses, go to college, and have productive lives, but we have to learn how to manage them at the same time. So I'm here tonight to ask any questions or answer any questions about mental illness, what it's like to have it, how we survive it, how we get our degrees and move forward. And I will stay after and answer any questions. And I'm the author of the books Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder, Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder, and Get It Done When You're Depressed. And I was in a relationship with somebody for 10 years who also has bipolar. And I currently can work about 25 hours a week. My bipolar disorder takes a lot of my time, but I am able to work, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Liz Fraser. Very different story. I'll just introduce myself to you. I'm from Oxford, born and raised, and I went to study in the other place. I'm sorry, made up for that by the fact that my daughter is now studying here, so we're okay. So yeah, I went up to Cambridge when I was, I guess, 18. We got any first years in here tonight? Any freshers? Well done, week 3, come on. And I had an eating disorder in my last year at school. Got much worse during my gap year, I suppose, all the usual jazz, and hit Cambridge in Freshers Week, and everything was great and wonderful, and it just went so badly wrong from there. And so I'm really here tonight. I suppose I'm an author and broadcaster. I mean, you know, I have a career now and 3 kids, and I do a lot of broadcasting work, and I'm also the creator of Headcase, which we'll get to talk about a little later. But I think for tonight, I'm kind of here as an Oxbridge grad. I know I've sat kind of where you're sitting now. I know what week 3 and week 4 and week 5 feel like. I know what it feels like to have an essay due tomorrow and you feel like you might want to go to the bar or maybe go out and you've got a tutorial and you haven't prepared, and kind of that, you know, that overwhelming pressure. So I hear you, and I kind of always want to mother everybody and make you all feel better. I failed my first year at Cambridge, which doesn't really happen in Oxbridge so much, because I had attended fewer than 10% of all of my lectures and practicals, because I was in my room being sick, so that's good. But I couldn't come out. I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't focus, I couldn't see, I couldn't remember things, because when you're so ill, whatever the illness is, whether it's addiction or whatever, your mind is so consumed by this thing that you have no energy or space left. You need to be very aware of how much that's draining your mental and your brain capacity. But they let me come back and I did resits and I did great in the end and went on. But still later in my life, I then had panic attacks in my 30s from nowhere. Why did I have panic attacks? I used to go traveling and jumping out of aeroplanes and bungee jumping, and I suddenly became unable to cross the street. So these things can happen to you throughout your life, and I suppose my message today is just to say that the power of talking to one person, any person, you know, I'm sure this will crop up more and more. That's my real thing, is that who is the next person that can help you? It is literally the next person you see. That can be in a supermarket queue, on a train, right here, anywhere. When you open up to somebody and you say, right now, I'm not feeling okay, you will be okay. Because that person, unless they're a total shit, will probably take you by the hand and go, all right, it's fine. And that's a release. So we'll come on to that later. But anyway, that's me. Yes. That's the end of that.
Hi, I'm Linda PAPADOPOULOS. I'm a psychologist. I guess for me, psychology, I kind of came to it in kind of a roundabout way. I'm Greek, so I've got a lot of cousins, a whole lot of cousins. And one of my closest cousins developed a skin condition called vitiligo, depigmentation disorder. And I remember it really striking me how this physical illness was affecting her mentally. So it was affecting not just the way she was behaving, but decisions she was making, decisions about going off to study, who she was going to be with, and it really stuck with me, especially sort of the stigma around it. I always found that skin diseases had such a stigma, so I began studying them in university. In fact, my PhD was around psychoneuroimmunology and how the mind affects the body, and one of the things that came up time and time again was that stigma that was there because of a mark on the skin was also there with stuff that nobody could see. So whereas the medical community understood stigma, right? I mean, we've had it for years. You kind of look at sort of the Bible and leprosy, or you look at kind of the whole idea of what a mark means. But when it came to mental illness, the idea that something that is invisible could yet be so stigmatizing stuck with me. And throughout my years in my clinical practice, I have sat across from people every week, I think, of my career that sit down and they apologize for being there. They apologize and say, look, I know I'm a bit crap. I should be able to cope with this. I should be fine. It's kind of my fault. I'm a bit weak, so I'm probably wasting your time. And it stays with me, this idea that had they had a broken leg, an ulcer, I know any other illness, I doubt they'd sit across and go, it's kind of my fault. It's, you know, for not being able to cope. And I think that's why I'm here, as someone who has a real passion about kind of ensuring that we value mental health in the way that we do physical health, that we don't kind of see it as sort of an add-on, something that we kind of tick a box next to. And sadly, we don't. In this country, even though we make up about 23% of the NHS burden, we only get allocated about 11% of the money on the NHS. In terms of, I know my doctoral students will tell you this, in terms of research into mental health funding, for every person, we spend about £9.75 on research when it comes to mental illness, when we're spending about £1,500 on cancer. So this disparity is huge, and it shouldn't be that big. We know that in the extreme, mental illness doesn't just affect one's quality of life, but it can kill. We also know, in the same way that I learned through my research on the mind-body connection with skin disease, that conditions like depression are more likely to predispose you to diabetes type 2, to cardiovascular disease. We know that within the next 20 years, depression is going to be the single most important source of disability in high-income nations and the second most important worldwide. So it's time that mental health doesn't become an afterthought. Oh, and by the way, I think it's important that we stand up, we talk, and we find solutions. And so I'm delighted to be here tonight.
Hi, I'm NICOLA BYROM. I feel like we're sort of moving on an academic scale along here, so I have to confess I have no media background and I'm probably not great at public speaking. I'm an academic, so you've all had great experience of your lecturers lecturing you. Anyway, I started getting really interested in how we think about student mental health when I was a student. So I had problems of eating difficulties as a teenager. I was quite unwell during my early teens and took some time out of school. By the time I was 18, I had a gap year and I thought I'd really got things sorted. I had a really great support network around me. I'd had some treatment. I knew what I needed to do to look after my own mental health. And everyone around me, I think this wasn't just me saying, felt, yeah, she's ready to go to university, this is going to be fine. And I got to university and it was okay to start with, but then it dawned on me that there was this huge chunk of my life that related to mental health and my mental illness that I didn't talk about. And to start with, that was fine. That just felt like, okay, obviously I'm not going to bring up, I took some time out of school and I had anorexia and this is all part of me in the normal conversations down the bar with these new people I was meeting. But over time I realized I was living a bit of a double life. I was the me I was now at university, and then there was this other me that had been once upon a time. And over time that actually created more and more stress for me, and I started finding it a bit more difficult to look after my mental health. And I think you guys have already flagged really well that it actually just takes some simple conversations. And what amazed me was when I started telling a few people about my experience as a teenager and a bit more about some of the troubles I'd had around mental health, I didn't just get a really supportive response. I got lots of people speaking to me about their own struggles. And I realized that I was sitting in a lecture room of 300 people feeling like I was the only person that had had this life experience, where there were another 50-odd people that had had a very similar life experience, and they were all sitting there going, oh, we better not talk about this is a bit strange. So when I graduated from my undergrad and I moved here, I set up this charity called Student Minds, which has this basic principle of just trying to get students to talk to each other about mental health. And what we try and do through Student Minds is recognize that there are lots of different sources of support, but actually all of us need to be part of that solution. We all need to be there to support each other. I went through a very challenging point at one stage in my time at university, and I reached out to the counselling service, and I had an appointment there, and it was okay. She was really nice, but she reminded me that I'd been through a lot of treatment. I knew what to do, and she was coming up with these suggestions like, yeah, I know that, tick that, yeah, done that, yeah. And so that didn't help me so much. I went to see my GP, and he said, sounds like actually you're doing quite a lot of work and maybe you should go on holiday. And he was right, that helped, having a break helped. But actually what I really needed was that ability just to speak to my peers and know that what I was going through felt normal and was okay. And they understood. And simply opening up and starting those conversations made a huge difference. So yeah, all about talking.
Thanks very much, all of you. I think one thing that sort of unifies everything that you've said is university. Whether it was the trigger for your interest, whether it was the first time you were really, really sick. For some reason, university stands as a point in time where there's a change. And I'm wondering why that is. Is it simply the stage you reach in your life, a certain development, or is it actually your surroundings? Why is university potentially so damaging?
Well, I can start with that simply because with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, you tend to have late teen onset. So adult onset bipolar disorder, mine started at 17, and My research over the last 20 years has also shown that a huge amount of people with bipolar disorder tend to go to college, much higher than a national average. And it has something to do with just the way our brains are oriented. It's not about being smarter, because believe me, we do not make great decisions when we have bipolar disorder. But it's a desire and an intellectual curiosity that tends to come with bipolar. So lots of first manic and/or suicidal psychotic episodes tend to happen in college for us. That's why so many parents have to get involved, why we lose so much money. So with bipolar disorder and to a certain extent schizophrenia, it is age of onset and you happen to be in college.
Yeah. I would totally second that. You are at a stage in your life, for a lot of you, it's the first time you've left home, you're living in a different town. We're quite cosseted now, really. I'm not saying that you all were, but you grew up in a certain place. You grew up with kids that you knew. You went to primary school, and maybe going to secondary is often a sort of a blip stage as well. But basically, this is the biggest shock, probably, in terms of practically, that you've been through. Of course, it's terrifying. Of course, it's strange. Where is all the stuff that you're used to? Where are all the parks and the friends that you had? It's different, and you're all thrown together from all over the country, dealing with stuff that you've probably never dealt with before, and it comes in thick and fast. And of course you're going to feel that enormous pressure. This is just a very classic developmental stage for changes to happen. I think the main thing is just to be aware of yourself, aware of changes in yourself, not to freak out about changes in yourself, but to have a very strong self-awareness, and just to occasionally check in with yourself and go, what's changed? Are there any strange things that I'm doing? When I'm doing a certain thing, why am I doing that? Am I going out because I want to go out or because I should go out? Am I worrying and am I feeling stressed because I think I should feel stressed, or because I actually am? Have I really eaten today? Or if I didn't, is it because I was really busy or because I just really don't want to? Again, not in an overly worrying way, but just to have a little self on your shoulder, just going, are you okay? And if not, why not? Or who can I talk to?
And really quickly, I want to add, I think there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. So your mental health I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm a little bit nervous. That can happen because of environment. That you can be absolutely fine in high school and you get to Oxford with your 8-week courses and the tutors and the pressure of being at such an illustrious school, etc. And that can cause mental health problems. That doesn't cause bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, unipolar depression, borderline. Those are brain illnesses. So knowing the difference between I'm stressed and I'm starting to get anxious and sick versus, oh my gosh, I just stayed up for 3 nights, slept with 3 different men, I've been drunk every night, and I just wrote a book. That's a different thing to look at, okay? So mental health, mental illness is something I think we also can define a little bit more.
Linda, I think you wanted to comment.
Yeah, well also I think one of the things that's interesting, so we know that a lot of mental illnesses between the ages of 18 and 24, we see kind of an onset there, but I think there's a couple of other things that are happening. Number one, mental illness is contagious. I work a lot with eating disorders, and we're finding increasingly they cluster. So you've got to imagine what happens, especially you guys that are sort of in your first couple of years of university. I think the fact that you're almost incubated, the sort of age segregation that we have in our society these days, which means that you're the same type of people 24/7, all with similar issues, all with similar solutions. This wasn't the case a few years ago. You would have the quirky aunt, the weird grandma to give you advice, and this is important. I think social media, I think the fact that we're constantly surrounded by people that are very similar to us all the time feeds into this, and I think the conversations that we have over and over again turn into ways of trying to cope with problems. I think that's certainly one of the things that happens. I think the other thing that happens is the insidious nature of perfectionism. You guys didn't get to university like this without working very, very hard and being in the top 1 or 2% of your high schools. That's simply the way it is. You're put then into a group of people that are all of a sudden at that level. So I always stood out because I was the smartest, I was the hardest working, I was the coolest, and now all of a sudden everyone's at that level. And one of the things that we find is that a lot of, again, eating disorders are very big on this, is a way of differentiating. I need to be different somehow, or I need to assert control somehow. And that's one of the other reasons that we tend to see early onset or onset of mental illness around this age group.
We're doing a great job about talking about the mental ill health end here. And I think actually it's really important that we all remember that we have mental health. And we have I'm going to be an academic for a minute, we're going to have a bell-shaped curve. So at one end of the spectrum, you're going to have people that have really substantive mental health difficulties that are challenging on a day-to-day basis to manage. But actually, most of us are going to fall somewhere in the middle, which means most of us are falling somewhere between quite substantive problems and moderately okay. And we all recognize that on a day-to-day basis, we vary between going, I feel quite good, or I feel quite shit. And so day in, day out, we're needing to do things to look after our mental health. And this is where I get into to thinking about, as a student, how many of you recognize that you're doing something every day as part of a routine that is good for your mental health, that looks after your mental well-being, that helps you de-stress, that picks your mood up? And don't expect answers, but I imagine that actually not all of you are able to recognize things that you're doing on a regular basis. And that's one of the challenges that we face when we move to university, is that actually that family life and at home and at school, that created a lot of structure for us, that encouraged us to do routine things that actually looked after our mental health. And university, you get thrown into this pool where you're expected to structure your own time. Some of you have 4 tutes a week, 3 tutes a week, a couple of lectures, and then this great big blank empty campus that you can fill as you please. And that makes it quite hard to start building a routine. And we need those routines that start building habitual behaviors that actually day in, day out make us check in and go, these are things that help me feel good. These are things that help me feel calm. And this isn't about mental illness, it's about mental health for all of us. We all need to be doing those things on a day-to-day basis that help us look after our mental well-being.
I was very interested by what you were saying in terms of contagious mental health, and it brought me back to when I was at school, and I remember there were a number of girls' schools where there were at least 5 cases in one year group of girls with anorexia and then similar disorders. Do you think there's a mental health case against having same-sex schools?
Ooh, it's an interesting question. I think that would, the fact that we see more eating disorders in all girls' schools, I think is to some extent a product of the fact that eating disorders cluster more in girls than they do in boys. I don't think that necessarily, I think also what we see sort of in all girls schools, for example, is more girls doing math because they feel they don't have to compete for boys' attention. So I don't think there's any good longitudinal studies to suggest that way. But I do think what is worrying is the other point around what happens within schools. I think this insidiousness, again, of perfectionism, I think that feeds in hugely to eating disorders, much more, I think, than gender per se. It's this idea that I have to control. If I don't control, it's this very black or white thinking. And I think this happens interestingly, with mental illness. I'm okay or I'm sick. Actually, it's a continuum. And one of the things that you find, and I'd be interested to hear in kind of your experiences as well, is this need, this kind of fear of not being okay. This need to fix it immediately. And when something is very painful, that's completely understandable. But I think, and we were speaking about this earlier, there's something about being able to tolerate things not being okay long enough to kind of ride through them and get the support that you need. And I think that certainly is the case with the vast majority of mental health issues that I tend to see.
Well, I think that's fascinating because I can tell you with my own bipolar disorder, because it's getting worse as I get older, having to learn to live with loss, live with the days that I lose, like being in Oxford and, like I said, just being sick for 3 days, and I knew that was going to happen. That's why I was here 3 days before this event. I knew I was going to get sick. It's not like I can talk myself out of it. I'd like to, but that's not how it works with really severe mental illness. So being able to sit, even though I'm crying, even though I'm not able to function as well, I'm writing in my journal, I'm writing my poetry, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a failure, I'm a big fat blob, and I'm this, and I went, no, you're sick. That's just what happens to you when you get sick. That's your depression, that's your anxiety. Look up, look at the world, talk to people, meet new people, and get forward anyway. I wrote a book called Get It Done When You're Depressed, because I knew writing a book about depression wasn't going to help a lot of us. I know I have depression. I have to learn to live with it every day, because that's when you have bipolar disorder, especially the really severe forms of it, you are sick a lot. You have to learn to tolerate it. And also, we've talked about the anorexia or eating disorder bulimia side of things. Those of us with bipolar, I'm an indicative of this. We have huge weight problems because of our medications. I'm on sleep medications right now that make me hungry 24 hours a day. So having to live with weight gain, weight loss, plus mental illness, then you add in eating disorders, I'm learning. For me, I bought a dress that fits my size. I'm not trying to hide. I'm not wearing a big cape. That's a big thing for me at age 52 to finally say, I am the size I am. And I'm not gonna hide, because I can't lose 20 pounds before this speech as much as I wanted to, right? So learning to sit with it and be more comfortable with who you are would have served me greatly in my 20s, because my symptoms were the same. So I think you're totally right. Some of us just have mental health issues that we have to learn to work around, including eating disorders. And we can learn to do that, because not everything is perfect. Yeah.
I wanted to come in and say something about what you've both mentioned about control, and also about this everything's great, everything's terrible thing. And I think, you know, most of us kind of have that to some extent. The thing about control is really interesting. We were talking about this in the car on the way over, actually, particularly with things. So if you're drinking a lot or taking a lot of drugs, that's kind of something to do with sort of losing control and just getting out of the headspace that you're in. You can go that way, or you can go the other way, which is more common in the type of people who are sitting in this room, which is the total control thing. You will exercise religiously, you will eat extremely, you know, carefully, and you think that you're in control of this. I have this, right? So for me, the whole thing with the scales and the number, that was something that I could control. So everything else could be spiraling all here, there, and everywhere, but I have this, because today I'm half a kilo less than I was yesterday. Oh, does that work? Yes. Mm-hmm. Of course, the irony there is that you're completely out of control. This thing has you. It controls you. And until you realize that, and until you say, excuse me, I'm sorry, you're ruining my life, so F you, totally. I'd love to say that in here, but I just can't. I F and blind a lot. You know, the only way you can beat any of these things or learn to live with any of these things is you are not ashamed of it.
Yeah.
That is so key. I don't want anybody tonight to leave this room at all in any sense feeling ashamed, unless you are a total asshole, of being ashamed of a part of you. And I suspect you're probably quite very nice people. Don't be ashamed of it, it's a part of you. Don't be frightened of it, right? Those are really, really key things. Accept what it is, go and find out about it, and then you take it in your control. You can decide that you're going to talk to somebody, get some help, and do what's required. Because then you beat it. Until the moment when you turn around and you go, do you know what, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to, unless it's like a severe case, which is you don't want to live this either, no, but you're managing it.
Life.
So I did want to say that about control, which I think is really important. You can, not all of you, but there will be people in this room who absolutely can take control of this and say, I'm going to do something to help myself. But then also just wanted to say about structure, because I know what it's like to sit where you are now. I think the reason why so many of us suddenly have this free fall when we come to university, and particularly Oxbridge, actually. When I went up to Cambridge, having been brought up here, my dad's a fellow in one of the colleges here, this was my life. I thought the collegiate system, one of the great things about the collegiate system was that you were surrounded by people, and there'd be people there to help you, and da 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 da. And actually, what I found was that if I wanted to shut my bedroom door and not come out, nobody would know. And these are the days before mobile phones. People had to come all the way up to my attic room in my first year and write on a notepad outside the door, because that's the only way we could communicate, to say, hey Liz, I came to see you. I was in the room. I was on the other side of the door. I could hear them writing it. Okay, if you want to disappear, you can disappear. And we'll be told a lot to look out for each other, look out for other people, make sure your neighbour's okay. Actually, hard message, you have to look out for you. And they could come to my attic room as many times as they like and write on the door and check on me and check I was okay, until you check you're okay, and until you accept that maybe you need to get a little bit of help. it will be impossible to make any progress. It really does actually come down to you at the end of the day to go, I want to change something.
I think you raised such an important point about this self-imposed isolation. So, from an evolutionary perspective, right, if you have a flu, it makes sense that you stay in your room and you stay away from everyone because you don't infect like the rest of the tribe, and you kind of, you know, your energy's better because you're not doing anything except watching, you know, Jeremy Kyle on TV, I'm oversharing, I'll stop, and then you get better. This is what happens when we're depressed though, and that is the worst possible thing. When you are depressed, your go-to place is to kind of leave me alone, right? So you hear scribbling outside your room and you don't open the door. People text you but you don't answer. I'm busy. And that's such an easy thing to do for you guys because you're allowed to socially isolate. Oh, well, they're just studying. They have exams. They're really busy. So it's so easy for you guys to do the exact thing you shouldn't be doing. And Liz raises such an important point. You both do, actually. It's integral that if you begin to find that your go-to position is, I don't want to see anybody, I don't want to go out, that's when the solution becomes part of the problem, because the more I avoid, the easier it becomes to avoid and the scarier it becomes to kind of reach out and get help. So as hard as it is, if any of you are finding yourself in that position, and it's what you were saying earlier, it's the person to talk to, right? It can be your your supervisor, your tutor, whoever is in charge of your dorm room. It can be a friend. It can be someone online. It can be someone that you don't know. There's amazing charities out there. But reach out, because the more you articulate it, it's like that Harry Potter thing, right? Voldemort, right? So that it became so bad and insidious because no one said his name. As soon as you say this, as soon as you name it and you talk about it, it takes a form. It becomes manageable.
So is that kind of closing the door, shutting down, something that's to do with the innate features, the psychological features of depression, or is it because of the stigma attached?
It's to do with the innate features of depression, but it's certainly complicated by the stigma attached.
Because I think stigma, I'm going to come to you on this actually, stigma is one of those buzzwords that is thrown around, whether we're talking about mental health, mental illness, but it's often a word that we don't really interrogate. So if I could throw it over to you to unpack what we mean when we describe the stigma of mental health.
And also talk about self-stigma, because we have society stigma and then we have stigma that comes from inside. So there's two types.
I don't know if you wanted to throw it to me because I've got rather complicated views on this one. So I think we've done an awful lot of work nationally to try and break down stigma around mental health, mental health difficulties. And I actually think that we've got to a point in this country where we are really aware about mental health problems. We know about these things, and actually you guys are quite able to go through a list of symptoms and go, yeah, that's like depression, or that looks like anxiety. But I think what needs to come after that awareness is a more fundamental understanding. I might be being overly soft here, but I think that a lot of the stigma that people experience is actually inadvertent. Today it is the people around you going, I want to be helpful, but actually I have absolutely no idea what helpful is in this situation. So really the best thing I can do is just keep quiet and pretend nothing's going on, because then I won't say the wrong thing. And I think a lot of the stigma that people with experiencing mental health difficulties are facing is actually that uncertainty that we're all experiencing, of going, I don't know what it is that's the best thing to do. And I think actually that ties back to your points earlier about contagion, and that actually that not knowing what to do breeds a huge degree of stress, which aggravates and creates more mental health difficulties. So for me, I think where we've got to with stigma is that we actually need a lot more work done in mental health literacy, in helping people understand what they can do to support others around them. So I actually pulled Nick along this evening, who's sitting in the audience, who helps us run a campaign at Student Minds called Look After Your Mate, which is all about educating students on how to support their peers, what they can do that is helpful. We try and avoid the list of don't do's because they're quite small, and doing anything is normally quite helpful. So if you're worried about somebody, or you're sort of thinking about how you could be supportive, there is a whole set of resources that Student Minds has put together on how to look after a mate. And I think that's the kind of work we need to see more of to start breaking down stigma, to give people the tools and understanding to know how they can be useful in this situation.
Well, another thing too to remember, because I'm always going to go back to the big two, the bipolars and the schizophrenia. the unipolar depression. When you get into mood disorders and psychotic disorders, a huge amount of us cannot see we are sick. So a lot of people think we're in denial. Our lives are falling apart, we're drinking, we are wrecked our relationships, we don't know what's happening, we've left our job, and we're like, I'm not sick, what's your problem? That's actually built into the illnesses. So if you're, and I know there are family members here right now who have loved ones who have let's say a big diagnosis, for example, they can literally be living on the street, and you try to help them and they will say, you are the one with the problem. So we're not even talking stigma when we get into a situation of someone not being able to see that they're sick. I have to fight it. If I get manic, I cannot tell I'm manic. Mania tells me that I am perfect and I am fine and I am beautiful and I am the smartest person in the world. I had to teach myself that those thoughts, you're beautiful, fine, perfect, and the smartest person in the world, were actually a sign of illness. Imagine having to ask for help when you feel like Superwoman. Or imagine when you're paranoid and you believe there's a camera up there, not here, but up there, and that it's going back to the Prime Minister and it's being recorded and everybody in the world is going to hear what you're thinking. You actually believe that. That's not about stigma. So there's a couple things that are going on with that. Also, it sort of drives me crazy when people say, I don't want the label of bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder, that label set me free. I was out of control. If I hadn't known what this was, this crazy behavior, people literally called me crazy. That's just Julie, she's off to China, that's just this, that's just that. And when I find out what I actually had, it was not a label and it wasn't stigma. So it goes both ways. Yes, we need to learn how to help somebody who's ill, but don't be surprised if someone can't see they're ill, and that's where you get really frustrated.
That's really interesting. Actually, I'm running a podcast series now for Headcase, and I interviewed a guy for the podcast last week. Really nice bloke, fit young guy, golf player, runs his own business, and he hit mania when he was 23. Had no idea what a manic episode was, and oh my goodness, you have to listen to it, because I just sat there all the time going, oh my God. But he said he knows that the next time he has a manic episode, he will be the last person to know.
Yeah.
And that phrase really sat with me, and he said it so many times during the interview. The next time I get really sick, guaranteed, I'll be the last person to know. Everybody else sees it, and you're there going, no, I'm fine. And you get angry with people. I get so angry with people trying to tell me that there's something wrong with me when I'm in a bad patch. I'm like, no, it's your fault, and it's this fault, and it's the fault of it. We will blame everything. We will blame our parents. We'll blame, social media. We'll blame the media. We'll blame anything. Our tutors, the work, Bottom line is, stuff happens. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. It doesn't matter why it's happening to you. It just is. So that sort of awareness. And I wanted to pick up on what you said, because isn't it amazing about not knowing what to do? We have first aid, right? My little one is 13 or whatever, but I mean, all my kids at primary school, you get given basic first aid, physical first aid. Probably everyone in this room knows what to do if someone's choking, for severe burns. We know first aid. Are we given mental health first aid? Are we? Shit, no, we're not. Do you know what to do for someone? Do you know what the best thing you could ever do for someone who's exhibiting depressive, symptoms? Do you know what to do with someone who seems to be, going to China and gambling and buying things and sleeping with loads of people and behaving in the most extraordinary way? Do you know what to do, what to say to yourself or to someone else? We're not taught this stuff.
And it's possible to learn it. It's not that hard to learn.
Yeah.
If someone says, I want to die, you say, well, lots of people who are depressed often say they want to die. Let's discuss this. Let's get you some help for depression. Whereas some people are like, oh my God, you want to die, but you're at Oxford and you're at the greatest university in the world, and what's wrong with you? And you were first in your class. We don't hear that. If we say we want to die, it's often because we're sick. And by having, I call this more of the medical model, and I don't mean medication model, I mean medical model. Most of us who are suicidal are because our brains aren't working correctly. So if we start to talk about it in a very open way like that, then when I get suicidal, I took Ambien, a drug this summer, and I got extremely suicidal, and I saw myself jump out of my window. I was going to school in France. If I had not known that I have bipolar disorder and medications can make me suicidal, I might have tried to jump out of my window. Instead, what I did was God damn it, I'm suicidal, I'm sick, what happened? And we backtracked and realized I'd started a medication 5 days earlier. So you can teach yourself how to take care of these really big symptoms by having a medical model, not feeling about stigma about it, and talking about it from really young ages. And then we're not so scared.
Yeah. I think we've got the first aid thing, we've got several layers of problems here, because actually we've got some neat interventions that are going on, like mental health first aid, which is reaching some people. But we've still got a bit of a mindset around mental health that this is a really big, scary thing. So actually the first step in mental health first aid, or any first aid for mental health, needs to be assess the problem and signpost to a service and work out which service it is and make sure that person gets to said service. And that often tends to be the focus, both sort of from peers, but actually all the way out through the system. It does my head in academia that I'm constantly reminded as a personal tutor, signpost to the services, get them to the counsellors. But actually, the reality that you guys all know is that you can signpost to services all you like, but often they're not there. Or you've signposted, you've got them to go and see the counsellor, and the counsellor says, 10 weeks, next year. And then what, as a friend, what are you left to do? And we need to move beyond the sort of identify and signpost to actually, you as a friend, or you as a personal tutor, or you, whatever relationship you have with them, actually just talking, engaging, being there and providing support. You might not be the expert, but being willing to listen and actually engage in that conversation around the mental health is really vital. And we need to have confidence to do that, because we can't signpost more and more people to ever dwindling mental health services.
Absolutely. I think the other point here is prevention. If, we should be able to tell people, if you have a mental health issue, you should feel completely and utterly justified, the same way that if you were in a wheelchair, if you were asthmatic, if you couldn't, if there was some reason that you had to live in a dormitory close to your school, that you were able to go in and say, here's a heads up, I have this mental health issue. That means that things are put in place. So say I have an eating disorder, and I say that to my tutors, then maybe I'll put into a self-catering or a non-catering service that'll help me. They'll ensure to get me to a GP. If I register with a GP, I'm more likely to get student disability allowance, which I can then, if they go to the counselor and they say, I'll see you, in 2020, you can then perhaps have some funding to pay for it. The other thing that I think is really important, universities need to get a hold of, if you get a leave of absence, you feel justified in taking care of yourself. The problem is that there's a fear that if I take time off to take care of myself, how do I come back and still make it at the top of my class and still finish with the first or whatever it is I'm doing? We make space for physical illness still a lot more than we do with psychological illnesses, and universities need to make it easier for people to refer. One of the biggest barriers to self-referral is, what is the impact going to be on my studies? What is the impact going to be on my future? So these are the very kind of, basic, hands-on, nitty-gritty things that we need to access. And then beyond that, I always look at universities' counseling services, and if it takes, something as simple as making it easy to find, if you're kind of clicking 35 windows before you find it, and there's 2 counselors for 5,000 students, it shows how it's valued. I think we need to value it more, to make it prominent. And I think all of these things will then make both self-referral and also the first aid thing a lot easier for people, because it's there.
So, did you want to say something very quickly?
Very quickly, I did. I actually wanted to ask you guys, can we have a quick show of hands, like anybody in this room who would say that at any point in your life you've ever felt anything kind of slightly odd going on in your head, or you're not kind of okay with something? I mean, anyone in this room? Hey, there we go, all right? So that's quite a lot of you. And can we also have a show of hands for any of you who at any point felt you did not know what to do, that you were not quite sure about what to do? Yeah, that's maybe half of those who put their hands up before, yeah, ish. So a lot of you in this room, maybe 70%, would say that you at some point felt a bit and about half of those said that you really had no idea what to do about it. When I gave a talk in the other place last week, I had a slideshow going on, and I showed like the proportion of people nationally who feel stressed all the time. So stressed, so it was like stressed a bit, stressed, these crappy degrees. Stressed all the time, it was like 12%. And I said to the students there, okay, here's a pie chart of those of you who will feel stressed all the time. And it was just a big circle, it's 100%. So without wanting to get rid of those of you who really will need help and do need help, that's what we're talking about today, I do think it is important, again, I'm being the hard mother line here, but it is important to remember that you will feel shit a lot of the time here, and that's not abnormal, that is not to be worried about, that is part and parcel of being here. You know, it is really tough, so just to half bear that in mind of what you think is probably reasonable, that yeah, it's not easy. You are going to feel very scared sometimes, you are going to feel under enormous pressure. It's just the point at which you feel, I can't cope with this pressure, I can't function normally, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm not socializing, etc. That's the point, and even that's not a disaster, that's okay, that's next step stress. Go and talk to somebody, etc., etc. But you will feel stressed a lot.
Thanks. I want to move on to slightly different territory before we open up to the audience. A lot of the members will notice that it's really quite rare that we'll have a panel which is all women, and it's particularly rare to have a panel that's all women for an event that isn't a women's issue being discussed. Do you think a hyper-masculine culture restricts men from coming forward and talking about these issues, or do you think it's an issue that affects more women because of the culture that we live in?
Noah, we need to throw that question back to you.
I was going to say, we should need to ask a man that, surely. Noah, do you think that...
Well, one thing I can say, and then I'd love to know what you think too, Noah, because I work with parents. So I work with parents and partners. I can tell you right now that I believe there is a phenomenal difference between testosterone and estrogen. And we do not talk enough, and bipolar disorder is not a hormonal estrogen-testosterone illness at all. But the way that, and it can be how we're culturally raised, etc., it is so much easier for women to talk about their feelings. But men will have the actions of mental illness. So when I work with families, I say start looking at what men are doing. Listen to what women are saying, because they'll say, I'm sad, I'm worried, or whatever. Men will change their actions. So absolutely men have the same symptoms, but they're not going to talk about it in the same way, because men don't talk, in my opinion, the same way that women do. But when a person starts changing their actions, that's when you can really see men having a lot of issues, or increasing. The biggest issue I see with young men is video games. And online gaming and video games increases like you would not believe when men get depressed. Women will isolate more. Men isolate by doing something active. So watching a man's actions is so integral versus what they're saying. And that's the biggest advice I have in terms of men. So no, men do not talk as much, but they will act out their depression, their mania, etc., and you can see it.
I was in my GP surgery the other day, and I was looking around at all the posters, and there was one on breastfeeding, one on touching your breast to make sure there weren't any lumps in them.
Big men's issues,
one about
these
babies.
big
Yeah, and I was like, what? There was like, if I was a guy, it was like the most feminized place you could imagine.
It's so true.
So it's not surprising that whereas women present with depression more often than men commit suicide more often than women. We know this, right? We also know that I'm sad is harder than I'm angry when you're when you're validated and validated in a society for this hyper-masculine persona that you have to put on. It's easier to pick a fight, to shout, to drink, than it is to talk about sadness. So yeah, so the language that we use and the way that we approach it is certainly different. And I think interestingly, we're talking about screen-based therapies. Now that screen-based implications, we know that screen-based entertainment increases central nervous system arousal, which is very severely implicated in anxiety disorders. So it's affecting all of us. And if it is true that men are doing this more, then that would be implicated as well.
I just wanted to add a little bit of a hopeful twist on this, in that I think that there is a bit of sort of social leading. We copy and we follow, and what I've got in mind is a few years back, and I don't know how long any of you guys have actually been at Oxford, but a few years ago there was a welfare officer in the Students' Union called Seb Baird who set up Mind Your Head. Seb's now one of our trustees at Student Minds, and he works on the Time to Change campaign. He's a bit of a legend. But what we saw here, really interestingly, while Seb was heading up that campaign, loads of men in Oxford spoke about mental health. By being given that role model in that position where he was confidently saying, I've experienced depression, I experience depression now, this is difficult for me. And he was standing up and saying that he got the rugby teams talking, he got lots of other sports teams talking, lots of men talking. So I think we need to, and I'm really bad at doing this because I'm a woman, but we need to get more men speaking openly about their experience, because I think when we do, other men follow.
The guy from Harry Potter who just did it, what's his name? The one on Twitter who came out, who's one of the actors from Harry Potter talking about his depression? Yeah, I wish I could remember his name, but oh my gosh, the reaction he got online was unbelievable. He's in his 20s, and he played one of the, I wish I could remember who it was, it's not Daniel Radcliffe, but just by talking about it, and there's an action, sending a tweet, for example, but I just think we've got to make it more comfortable for men to know that it's not weak to be depressed. And that's what's important.
Do you still find that? Is that still a thing?
Oh, yes.
Do you see that amongst your, really, I'm getting a lot of nods here,
Oh, yes.
really?
Oh my gosh, yes.
God, okay, because when I interview men, and so head case that I'm setting up is overtly gender non-specific, and it's very much talking to men and wanting to get men to speak out. When I interview guys, they're so good at talking about these things. They're fantastic. They're really emotional. Whereas girls can be a little bit more. We still want the surface thing. We still want to just put that image across. Whereas guys, once you literally give them that platform, they're like, bam, straight out. You think, wow, okay, I was not expecting that. So it's kind of, we just need the vehicle. We need the place. And seriously, that can be the person in the room next door to you or whatever. But no, men are fantastically open and emotional. It's just finding the way to open that.
I think it's quite interesting that you mentioned depression, because where I see the biggest problem amongst men is actually in eating disorders. Because if you say anorexia, your automatic image is a girl, and I think bulimia is exactly the same. And the most mentally sick people I've met are guys with bulimia, guys with anorexia, because they are so terrified of anybody knowing about that. Yeah. And so I don't actually think this depression, weakness stigma is actually the most dangerous for men. I feel like it's eating disorders.
Really?
Very interesting.
And substance abuse. Substance abuse is huge in that area as well.
But I think, perhaps what you so substance abuse that we know that this happens, and people drink too much or take too many drugs. But that's interesting that you say that. You see, if you have any sort of mental health issue at all, or mental illness issue at all, it's when you can't talk about it, when you really feel that you can't, that's when it becomes a real problem. So that's sad to hear that, you're right. If you hear about a guy who's bulimic, you're like, he what? And so why should it be okay? It's not okay for girls to say it, it's very hard to say it, but it is more shocking when it's a bloke.
There's a great campaign called Men Get Eating Disorders Too, if this is ringing any bells for anybody, and they've got lots of great and useful information out there, and they do some lobby work if you're interested in it around trying to raise the profile of this problem.
One thing, I just wrote an article about this, and I called it the coping list for bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or whatever. Eating, drugs, snorting Adderall, sex, whatever. Because the reality is that when we don't feel well, we do not tend to go towards behaviors that are good for us. There is something in the human condition that makes us go towards behaviors that are bad for us. For me, it's sugar. For a lot of people, it's drinking. Other people, it's sex, gaming, whatever it is. What is it that we need to change so that when we are driven towards the food, towards the alcohol, etc., that we can stop ourselves and say, whoa, I'm going there because something's not right. What can I replace it with? People will say meditation, etc. You have to find out what that thing is for you, that you can replace the binge Netflix watching, replace the staying in bed all day, the ice cream, the heroin, or whatever it is. Because I'm not a really big believer that we have a huge substance abuse problem where we treat substance abuse. We have to treat why are so many of us zoning out with food, drugs, and video games and social media. Something's not right with us that we need that. I don't think it's that we're bad. We need something. What can we find to replace that with? So when I go for the ice cream, maybe if I picked up the phone and said hello to the 5 million people who are trying to call me instead of going for the ice cream, why is it so hard for me to pick up the phone and so easy for me to eat the ice cream? And I don't have an answer yet. That's where I am in life. I think if we can figure that out, we're really moving towards something.
You've touched on something so central, I think, and it is about choice. And often when we're feeling weak or vulnerable or down or whatever, we think we don't have a choice, or we want somebody to just tell us the answer, because I'm too weak to make this choice, I'm ill, I can't make this choice. Actually, you have that choice. And I have seen people who would always have the drink, or who would always take the drugs, or who would sit at home playing computer games. And literally, it's almost as simple as saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. That's it. You have a choice. You can be this person, or you can be this person.
But what do we replace it with?
Well,
how
okay.
do we find the thing to replace it with?
Well, I've seen it happen with sport a lot. So people decide, you know what, I'm going to take up running. I'm going to start, you know,
let's take a comment all the way down, and then we'll ask a final question and pass to the floor. You and then Nicola.
Well, I was going to say one of the biggest problems when it comes to mental health is we're finding now some great research by Stephen Iliard, who's doing some amazing work with kind of very serious depression, is rumination. So we were not meant to be the Netflix binge watching, stay at home on the screen, worry all the time, feel that you're not updating, getting the likes type of human beings. Our social evolution has nowhere, rather our natural evolution as human beings has nowhere near caught up our technological and social evolution. We had 12,000 years of the last 12,000 years sort of not being hunter-gatherers, and within the last couple of decades our social groups have expanded dramatically. We simply have not caught up. So the simple fact that we have so much time to ruminate over crap, right? Over things like how many likes, how big my waistline is, if my balayage or my hair is working, whatever it is that I'm worrying about, right? That feels really important, is something that we didn't even have 50 or 60 years ago. Here's an interesting fact. Depression increases by age cohort. So somebody in their 60s today will only have a lifetime chance of becoming very severely having a mood disorder by about 10%. If you are between 18 and 24, you have a 25% chance by the time you're 30. By the time you're 45, you have a 50% chance. Something has changed in our environment. And one of the things that a lot of research is finding is that rumination is part of it, this space of kind of getting caught in your thoughts, and that spiral, right? And that thing, that itch you can't scratch, that bully on your shoulder that keeps saying, no, don't let go of that thought. You need to think about that a little bit more. Really, are you sure? That bully, that abusive bully on your shoulder that tells you you're not good enough, that you've got to go over and over again. If we can change that, then there's a significant chance we can get control over our mood. And how do you change rumination? There's a couple of things that you can do. Number one is redirecting attention. Just to give you what the research shows. Redirecting attention, having shared activities. And that doesn't mean necessarily talking about the problem. This is kind of counter to what we've been saying so far. I talk about the problem in a clinical setting, that's fine. If you and I go out for a coffee and I'm just talking about it and you're basically talking about it and we're just talking about how shit everything is, I'm not going to feel better. If you and I go out for coffee and we talk about, I don't know, not Man United, I'd be so depressed if we talked about that. Really, right?
Yeah, you're
what the hell? Oh, I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, me too,
Don't even. That we'll do some group therapy after together. But something else, right? Something that is a shared activity that we're doing, right? A game that we're playing. That's shown to really help. Changing environment. Again, exercise, guys. If we could bottle the effects of exercise physiologically and also mentally, if pharmaceutical companies could sell you this drug, it would be the #1 selling drug. It is so good for you. So if you hear nothing else tonight, hear this. This is something that you can do something about, whether it's your eating or your mood disorder or substance abuse. And part of it is acknowledging that you're a generation that's arguably living in some of the fastest times ever. And that's, it's a scary thing, but you've got this because you're also really well connected and you're super bright and you're having conferences like this and you're having these discussions and the information is out there. So seek it and take responsibility, because like anything that's worth having in your life, you guys didn't get here by accident. You got here because you researched and you looked into it and you worked at it. And taking that responsibility for your mental health and having that sense of entitlement is key, and it's something we all deserve. You all deserve.
I think Linda said almost everything I wanted to say just there. That was fantastic. But because all I want to say is that we do know the things that help. We do know what we ought to be swapping in when with struggling. And I just wanted to signpost you to Action for Happiness, for example, who have got loads of great resources that are all research-backed, evidence-based on things that you should be doing. They've got a great acronym called Great Dream, but I can't remember all 10 things, but there's some stuff about giving and learning and taking notice of things. And anyway, take a look at it, because there are really simple things that we can be doing, that we can start swapping in for destructive behaviors.
And I want to say real quick too though, but if you are dealing, or somebody you love is dealing with a diagnosed serious mental health disorder, we use substances and a lot of those behaviors because our symptoms are very painful. We're not talking about just being unhappy. We're talking about hearing voices. We're talking about thinking somebody's following us. We're talking about wanting to scratch our own skin or something like this. So finding something to replace that with, this is important, and if you are talking about the milder things, yes, exercise and all that, that works greatly, but sometimes it is medication, and sometimes it is a diagnosis, or taking rustication, which I learned about, or all of this. It is about that. So you can be so sick, like I was, that it's not just about going and taking a walk. It's about getting really serious psychiatric help in order to move forward. And so, there, like you said, it's a bell curve. When I'm all the way over on this end, I needed a lot more than what a lot of organizations could offer me. So check it out and see if you need something more, like I did.
I'd like to spend the last 10 minutes with hearing some questions from the audience. So if you can keep your questions brief, and if there are a particular panelist, do say the name. If it's general, then say so as well. And when you receive the mic, stand up and speak loudly. Yes, there's a second row there.
Hi, thank you for your talks. That was really interesting. I wanted to ask, because you talked about how even in your own mania, it can be very difficult to know that you're sick, and with that in general, I think with lots of us, when we know people that are sick, the difficult thing is not making it feel like it's a betrayal when you tell them to go to the doctor, because a lot of people are in denial that they're sick. So if you say, oh, you should go to a GP, if someone says, well, I'm not sick, oh, you're just like the rest, you think I'm ill, you think I'm crazy. How would you overcome that kind of pride barrier?
The first thing is you have to have these conversations when someone is well. Trying to talk to somebody who's severely depressed or starting to get manic or who is highly anxious or who's already psychotic, you are talking to the illness. You are not talking to the person. So if somebody is paranoid and you're saying, come on, there's not anybody following you, they're hearing you and they'll go, okay, but in their mind, literally the voice is going, that person's lying to you, that person's lying to you. So the first thing is have, and I think that's all what you're saying, have the conversations now. So if you know somebody who already has a mental health disorder, ask them, what do I do if I see you getting manic? So trying to talk to somebody while they're already in the episode simply doesn't work very well. You have to prepare in advance. But if there is somebody that you care about who's sick, lots of times you have to trick them. And basically what it comes down to is, I'm going to take you somewhere, or we need to go somewhere where you can talk to somebody or where you can get some help. And sometimes it's not about actually what's going on with them. If you have something in particular, talk to me afterwards, because when you're talking about the really serious stuff and you're way up there and they're pretty sick, I've got some stuff I can tell you, and it's not something that's super easy to do, and that's why it's so hard. So talk before.
Can I step in?
Yes, quickly, and then we'll take another question.
I just want to send you in the direction of the resources that we have at Student Minds for looking after a mate, because there is a cycle of change that we want to think about. And for some problems, if they're in what we'd call a pre-contemplative stage, you're calling denial, there are perhaps ways that you'd want to approach this differently to if they're recognizing that there's a problem. And I can't do this all in a nutshell here, but there's lots of resources that we've put online to try and think through those different stages that someone's at and the kind of questions and the kind of things that you could be doing at those different steps.
Good. Can we move to another question? And there will be time after if you want to continue these discussions. Front row over there, please.
We've spoken a lot tonight, obviously, about like mental illness being a problem that's inherent to universities. That's like why we're here. But also, you know, there is research now showing from a new mental health charity called MQ that says that 75% of mental illness starts before the age of 18. So it may be perhaps that university is an environment, as we've spoken about a bit tonight, that is a place where these problems start to manifest themselves properly for the first time. But actually, shouldn't we be educating people before this, so that we actually are prepared by the time we get here when they start? And we've spoken a bit about how education of physical health should be equated to mental health. Why aren't we doing enough to help kids in schools? And if we can, then how do we do it?
Well, thank you. The answer, we are. I'm speaking as a mother of three. Oh gosh, they are. And they are given PSHE, which stands for stuff, but it's basic. I have no idea. I'm worrying about lunch boxes and stuff like that. You know, they are given so much more now than I was. I'm really old, and maybe a little more than you were, that you're very young. So they are. It's a little tricky one with mental health as well, because, well, with all aspects, there are certain things that you actually don't want to put into a child's mind that were never there before, if you see what I mean. So they struggle a little bit with thinking, should we be telling 5-year-olds about depression? Is that helpful? Or should we not? Because they didn't know they were depressed, or they didn't think they were till we told them about this amazing thing called depression. And now they're all depressed. Great. You know, so it's difficult to know what to say, but luckily there are professionals who study all this thing and know what is the right age to introduce what.
Well, I think, yeah, my daughter's here as well tonight, and I know every time I say something, she's like, oh, for the love of God, they just give us 3 lectures on that. Poor kid, being the daughter of a shrink. Anywho, I think they are, and I think one of the things, though, that we're aware of is exactly the point of how do you, it's sort of like sex education, right? So you want to say it, you want to say that it's out there, but you want to do it in a way that they understand that some of the portrayals of it aren't realistic, and that some of the most extreme cases are things that are rare. So it's about kind of, there's something in psychology called medical students' disease. So apparently in the first year medical students, they end up thinking they have every illness they study, just because that's the way that we learn, right? We kind of, and so I think that's what people are very aware of. In the few lectures that I know of colleagues of mine that do, one of the things they try and do very much is normalize. So kind of, you know, this exists. It's out there, and in the same way, you know, you don't want to eat a lot of sugar because you get diabetes. Actually, you want to talk about things not feeling great because it'll stop you in many cases, or it'll preempt it. And if and if there is an issue, there's a solution to every problem. It's a lot more about containing, because I think a little bit of knowledge, you're right, is a really dangerous thing. So you want to give enough knowledge, but at the same time, you know, you don't just want to define a problem. You want to suggest that there's a solution, and a lot of the best talks do exactly that. So I hope that's kind of answered your question.
Let's take another question. Oh, there's a hand that shot up, second row. Yep, you.
Hi, I want to thank you all for coming tonight and speaking with us. It's a very important topic. And I know we touched on, you know, the barriers of hypermasculinity, dealing with mental illness, and, you know, getting men to really speak about their issues. And I was wondering if you had any ways of really combating, you know, so for example, my background, I'm not only Black, but I'm Nigerian. So you have the hypermasculinity of Black culture on top of being Nigerian, which is also super masculine, and getting people in my family to talk about mental illness, and a lot of that runs in my family. So I was wondering if you had any resource that you could use to help, you know, men of color really open up and speak about, you know, their mental health status.
Well, unfortunately, that's who was going to be on the panel tonight. Was Stephen Amos was going to be here and was not able to be here. There's a website you can go to called BP Hope, and it's in the United States, but it's a magazine for people with bipolar disorder, for example. And it has a huge section of bloggers of all races, Muslim, Christian, Black, Asian, woman, male, and it's on purpose that it's like that. So blogging is where you can go. You'll be surprised at how many people online are writing about their experiences being an African American man with depression. And it's something that's not talked about. I can tell you in the United States, and I know England is quite different, you have much more of an African, from Africa influence here. Our African American issues that are going on right now are so huge it's beyond words. But I can tell you, because bipolar disorder has literally no race, no any type of ethnic kind of basis. In other words, we are sick the same in every culture. You will find more people with bipolar disorder who are African American talking about it, maybe more so than depression. That's one resource that you can go to.
Okay. Let's take one more question from the audience. Let's go to the hand in the corner over there. Furthest to the left on the front bench, or it's the second bench. Yeah.
Hi, so I would like to preface this by saying I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder last December. And I did actually rusticate in an attempt to deal with it, but we've talked about the difference between mental health issues and mental illness. And I remember in my second year, I was well enough to realize that something was wrong. And I kept trying to get help, but I kept being pushed in different directions, being told, oh, you're depressed, you've got anxiety, what you need to do is you need to do some yoga. By the end, I wanted to slap someone. I was like, I'm not doing flipping finger painting. But so I wanted to know what's being done really to help people who really are in that position where they realize it's not a mental health issue. These things aren't going to help. How do they get into the next phase of help? Because, I mean, I had to fight so hard to be taken seriously. And diagnosis is the best thing that's ever happened to me, so.
Well, I can just one thing I can say, if you have or you know somebody who's diagnosed with the big four, so that's a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, a personality disorder, or a psychotic disorder, we need help the same way that somebody who has insulin-dependent diabetes, who has MS, these are big illnesses. So when you are diagnosed with one of those big four illnesses, you need medical and family and personal help. So the university can provide something for you, but it's not going to be enough. And I know you probably noticed that. I think educating the tutors here, educating the chaplains, working with your organization, et cetera, to talk about how serious these illnesses are. We can't think our way out of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or severe anxiety. These are physically debilitating brain illnesses. So I think taking them more seriously and having people like you speak up is what's going to be the difference. There's a level of care that the majority of people are going to use, then there's a level of care that we need that's on such a high level that we actually need more medical care, I think. And so you guys can speak to that, I think.
Yeah, I guess do you want to?
I was just going to make an angry rant that actually, yeah, we can educate peers and we can educate tutors, but we need to do better education of our GPs. Because they're the gatekeepers for treatment, and I think the younger generation are doing a little bit better, but we need to keep pushing this education around mental health. They don't spend nearly enough time studying mental health in medical school.
Absolutely. I was actually going to praise that point. And the other thing that we didn't really speak about tonight was medication. And I know, look, I get that it's a contentious issue. I get that a lot of people are afraid of medication, but sometimes it really is the difference between life and death. It's the difference between being able to get up in the morning and function and being stuck in bed. So I think there needs to be some more positive discussions around the efficacy and when and where it's needed and the correct use of medication. So.
For example, does anybody know the fact that people with bipolar disorder cannot take antidepressants unless we are given a mood stabilizer with them? Guess who in the United States, 80% of our antidepressants are prescribed by GPs who have had one round of psychiatric care. So we have a medication problem that's so huge. One thing that we haven't talked about as much here, though, that I just wanted to bring up, I recently took Facebook off my phone. Social media kills me. And my work is in social media because I can't work in a traditional job. I write books. I have to support myself, and it's done through blogs and writing and panels and traveling. I can't handle the amount of social media we have right now. I cannot, as a person with bipolar who also has psychosis with anxiety, handle the comments and the tweets and the Kim Kardashian and the duck lips and all of this. So I took it off my phone. We need to be connected, but with serious mental health, we must disconnect from the internet in the way that we're doing it right now. We absolutely must, and I think that's what we're going to see as we move forward with more bipolar treatment. We can't binge watch The Walking Dead like we want to, and we can't be online seeing who's written us, and online dating and all of that. Some of us can't do it, and I think that's the future of mental health treatment. Okay,
we're going to take 1 minute closing remarks, starting from this end.
Oh shit.
And we can start at the other end if you prefer.
No, it's okay. It's been actually fantastic to be here this evening and to hear some of the questions and to actually get this orientation that there's a huge range of issues that we're talking about here, from really substantive mental health difficulties that need really intensive treatment right through the spectrum. And I guess I'd end by challenging all of you to think that there are things that everybody needs to do wherever they are on the spectrum to take care of their mental health. And there are things that you need to be doing every day, not when it starts becoming a problem, not when you get stressed, but today.
I guess my main message would be is to kind of have a healthy sense of entitlement over your health. If you went into your GP with a broken leg and said, well, maybe I'll get you to see someone in about 10 to 12 weeks, maybe 3 months, you'd be like, it's broken. I need help now. You need to be able to seek help. And if you can't do it yourself, then you find someone that'll speak up for you. You need to make the time, you need to make the space. It really has been an absolute honor being here around so many people that care enough to show up. So thank you all for showing up and talking, because I think civilization is, the future of it is based on the conversations we have together. Whether we're talking geopolitics or whether we're talking about health. And these conversations are going to be the difference between the experiences that we've described today and hopefully the experiences people have in the future.
So agree. And how much have we said the word talking tonight? That it's just really so much is about talking. All of you in this room are lucky, because you're all going to leave this hall with some new information and some new strength, actually. And please tell your friends about what you've learned tonight, because they didn't come, maybe they should have come, but you did, and that's fantastic. I want to say one thing before I finish. I'm here on behalf of Headcase, which is what I've created. And I say that to you because it is for you. It is made for you. You are the people who need this kind of thing most of all. It is a mental health website that completely rebrands mental health. When I had serious mental health issues, and I had a total nervous breakdown last year, and for the reasons you said, I couldn't be put on antidepressants because it would ping me up the wrong way. Sometimes when you go on a mental health website, you feel like you don't want to be there, like you feel that you're crazy or it's scary. So I've created Headcase. It's very cool, it's beautiful, it's very stylish, and it does not look like a mental health website at all, but it does link to all of them. So if you can at some point, go and check it out. It's launching in January, and really you are absolutely the people that this is for. And just outside the door are some pieces of paper and a pen, and my other half will be with a camera. If any of you feel like you want to, you just write right across the piece of paper in capital letters, the mental health thing that affects you. Whatever it would be, social anxiety, anorexia, substance abuse, panic, whatever it is, write it on a piece of paper, stand there, we'll take a picture, you don't have to see your face, and we're putting them into a really powerful series of photographs where literally you're holding the thing that affects you so much, and it's these images, and it's this talking that we're doing tonight, which is going to make such a difference. Thank you.
Cool. My next book is actually for children, and it's poetry that's written for children who have mental health disorders so that parents and healthcare professionals can read it. Because kids who are 4 years old get suicidal when they have severe mental illnesses. And I'm not talking about kids with family problems. I'm talking about those of us with brain disorders. But one thing I can say, I'm 52 years old. That story I told you about throwing the glasses and going to the boyfriend, etc., that was 1981, 1982. Look how far we have come. When I used to talk about bipolar disorder when I was diagnosed in 1995, maybe one person in the room knew what it was. Everybody knows what bipolar disorder is now. And I know I had something to do with that because I was started on the web in 2002. And I have to remind myself to, even though I don't have a lot of feelings and a lot of excitement sometimes because my depression is so severe, you don't always have to feel great about what you're doing. Do it anyway. The feelings can come after. Motivation doesn't always have to happen in the moment. Do the work, the motivation then will catch up with you. I am hugely positive about what's happening. I have a 14-year-old nephew, and I started to educate him about bipolar disorder when he was 4. Everybody in high school talks about these illnesses now. The difference in just 20 years is incredible. And what you guys can do as you move forward, it's completely changing the world, especially for different cultures, in the African American culture, the Asian culture, men, women. We have progressed. We are not regressing. We are progressing. And an event like this is absolutely wonderful, and it's been an honor to be here tonight. Thank you.
We hope to... We're hoping to continue the conversation in the bar afterwards. Some of our panelists will be sticking around, so do come along, particularly the person over there whose question I didn't quite get to. Come along and ask the question. But please remain seated while the panelists leave, but do join me in thanking them for what was an incredibly insightful talk.